moved to our data visualization and marketing insights group. And it was really great last night talking to everybody. And I'll talk a little bit about what Accenture does in the brand marketing space. But first of all, I had this idea that I used to do some branding work in the past, and I have like 3 favorite books. And I was thinking I was going to do a contest to see if anybody could help me finish the logo quiz. And I would give away one of these books. And then I was like looking at this at Amazon, and I don't know if you guys, has anybody read any of these books about brand and desire, the art of branding? They're great. They're really simple, beautifully designed. Look at the price on the middle. For a paperback book, $254 new, $54. So I'm not going to be giving that away. The 38-cent one, maybe. What I thought was really interesting about this, though, is like this is like how data kind of just infuses our world. This guy wrote 3 really interesting books. They're really well designed. One of them, the market's saying is worth $254. The other one is worth 38 cents. And so you can find that in a second. If you want to know which of your books is the favorite, I think we know. So I am with Accenture Interactive, and Accenture Interactive is Accenture's practice that's really kind of driven around the CMO agenda. The CMO agenda is really changing very dramatically. It's much more technology focused today. I think everybody probably that I talked to last night was stating that as well. And I think what's really interesting is how it's being disrupted by technology. Because the way we think about what the CMO is worried about is really changing. I'm going to spend a couple minutes just laying out some of the kind of context around this CMO agenda and how technology is hitting it. I think the biggest thing that we think about is this kind of volume of data and data explosion. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, but I do think we need to ground on it. Because it's not going to get easier. We really kind of start with the internet, and I actually was working in like some internet startups back in like the mid-90s, like 1993, 1994, when just as the web was coming up, one of our partners was a Netscape in their first browser. But really the thing that's going to drive data across, that's going to just crush marketing organizations is this idea of mobile data, first of all. It's collecting data as people are in motion and being able to deal with it. Thinking about the content and the amount of data, how much richer content is than little bites of data along the way. And then this kind of Internet of Things that we're just starting to get to. And I'm not like a huge proponent of like kind of futuristic stuff, but you already see it happening as people are using like Nike Plus or Nike Fuel, Fitbit, things like that, where people are using wearable devices and walking around and collecting data and sharing it on Facebook, right? So you have this information that you'd never even shared with your doctor in the past. Oh, I went running 5 times this week, and this was my heartbeat, and this was my my recovery rate, is being shared with the general with your friends and family electronically immediately. And it's not just what's wearable, but also scannable information, sensors that are out there, and the capabilities that are being developed around automated driving and drones and things like that. Just there's huge amounts of data just taking off beyond what we've ever really had to deal with before. And this brought me to kind of like this research question, and this was billed as a research presentation. And I was like, I was trying to pull together a lot of numbers for this, and then I hit this one number, and this is what really struck with me. And I decided that rather than going really broad with a lot of data points, I'd really kind of focus in one area. Accenture does a CMO Insight survey. This is from last year, 2012, our most recent one. I thought what was really interesting is the top 3 marketing issues are also the ones with the highest level of difficulty. And those are increasing sales, getting new customers, keeping the customers you currently have. That there's a lot more focus on like kind of end-to-end technology and weaving together all the technology capabilities that the CMO is managing. I was talking to one client about a year or so ago, and we were talking about some of the not problems, but she's like, well, I have this, I have that. And she's like, I have no end of tools, but I really don't have insight into my business, because every one of those things is giving me different information. When you're driving on the highway, your dashboard gives you a really simple view as to how fast you're going, is your car running, and you can keep going. When you're in the CMO world today, because there's been so many different technologies implemented, they really struggle to kind of understand what are the core KPIs that are driving their business. And I think you see this reflected here, which is number 4 on this list, is managing the company's corporate brand and reputation. I was really shocked that that was number 4, because really, if number 1 is customer retention, well, there's other people worrying about that, right? You have customer care, you have other people that are concerned about that. If it's acquisition and sales, you have other people worried about that. Your salespeople, your whole sales force is driven around acquisition. I don't think brand should be number 4. I think it should be much higher. And I think that's partly because brand has never really been easily measured. But as we've moved to this kind of digital marketing infrastructure, brand is constantly being marketed. We just don't know how to do it in today's world. So I have a hypothesis. And I'm going to start with kind of one simple kind of positioning. And maybe I'm just kind of old school. But I think brand is the central focusing reason for the business. It's the reason that the business exists. I spent 10 years in telecom right after deregulation with MCI. And I had a consultant tell me, you guys have a brand promise. You can do it just as well and a little bit cheaper. And once we accomplished that, and there was no more way to make it cheaper, the company really didn't have a reason to be. And I think brand promise helps centralize and drive that whole organization together. So long distance went away because you couldn't make it cheaper. There's no reason. And nobody ever talks about it anymore. But we accomplished that goal of making it cheaper. That was the brand promise. So my hypothesis is that brand measurement is going to become much richer, much more refined, and much more reactive to the world that it exists based on some of the new data technologies that are available to us. I think this is really important from a brand perspective because of 2 reasons. The first is that marketers exist in this world that's happening in milliseconds. You have to be able to deal with that. And when you're doing contextual marketing, where advertising is showing up in real time to consumers as they're on their way to a purchase decision, as they are in different parts of the customer path, if they are reaching moments of truth, the key thing that the brand brings is trust. It differentiates you from your competitors. And if you lose that, your brand is no better. If your brand is no better than all the other competitors out there and you're just competing on speed, that's not where you want to be. The other piece is that brand value can be destroyed in 250 milliseconds. Same thing that happens. So, relevant story last night on the way to the golf course. Well, I say on the way to the golf course because my driver, who will remain nameless, was using Apple Maps. We were supposed to be going north and we were heading south. So really, if we continued on the direction we were going, it was going to take us quite a bit longer to get there as we circumnavigated the globe. And what was interesting about that is, that type of event, when Apple launched Apple Maps, it really broke that brand promise. The company did a great job of rebuilding that, but it took away that little bit of trust that we had in that 200 millisecond information. When I say, I want to go to Whistling Straits Golf Course, and it doesn't know where you're going. And not only that, brand has the biggest risk from outlier behaviors. I think the gentleman sitting at my table I met earlier this morning was talking to his airline, and he tried to change his seat using their automated system. That didn't work. Then he called the agent, and the agent couldn't help him. And then he's like, he still doesn't know whether he has the right seat, but his bags are checked. Those types of moments of truth happen very quickly, and brand identifying those requires really a kind of understanding the outlier behaviors in organizations. And what's interesting is that big data technologies are really designed to help identify those needles in haystack and draw those capabilities out. So let me talk really quickly about some opportunities I see in the brand marketing space that big data is driving. The first kind of central concept is this kind of marketing analytics revolution. And really what this is all about is reducing the friction between the thing that's creating the data and the thing that needs the data, and then pushing the data back. Most organizations have a lot of systems that are designed with a lot of friction in them, and the data can't get to different places. It might take days, it might take weeks. In a lot of brand marketing, it might take months to really understand what the impact of your campaigns were. That friction needs to kind of be reduced. So when we look at a lot of the brand marketing use cases for big data, whether it's reputation monitoring, brand advertising, which is really reliant on big data and data management platforms, brand relevance, looking for fraud, where people have taken over the brand and used it, whether it's for actual products or for spamming or phishing. Looking at the energy of your brand or even brand extensions, they've all been done in the past, but now they can be re-energized through the use of some of these new technologies. And I'm not talking about the actual hardware and software, but really different ways of delivering analytics and different analytic capabilities. The first area is being able to aggregate large amounts of data at low cost. So one of the biggest things that the big data world has done is really remove the economic barriers to having almost as much data as you can imagine. When you can store on Amazon, AWS, a terabyte of data for I think it's $100 a year. You can store or $1,000 a year, large amounts of data for a long time, and then use that data when you need it. But the real interesting things are when you can really mobilize that data for analytics like pattern matching. So if you want to look and see whether or not somebody's stolen your brand, you can actually use pattern matching technology to decide whether or not that brand, that logo or that image is something that you previously used. You can do outlier analysis where you can look at large amounts of data and more quickly find things that are happening outside the patterns that you need. I'll talk a little bit more in detail on pathing in a second, but it's really kind of structuring the data in the way marketing thinks. And instead of thinking about data as aligned around maybe a customer account or how you deal with the different parts of the business on a one-to-one basis, that you can structure the data completely differently. And then as we get into real-time analytics and text analytics, we see these capabilities really flourishing. Now most brand marketers probably started getting into the big data space using text analytics. And a lot of the text analytics tools that are out there, whether it's like a social media monitoring tool, using text analytics is a place where we started to really see brand monitoring happening first. But the ability to do that allows you to kind of extend that into sentiment in other parts of the business. So what data is being collected within the business that can be analyzed beyond thinking about just using text for social analytics? The other is time series analysis, and I talked a little bit about this in pathing. I think this is this is the thing that made the light bulb go off for me that this was different. I've been working in the data space for a long time, and data was always structured around the way you collected it. But the way we market really goes with time. You have people going through a funnel. You have people on a customer journey. You have events happening through your campaigns. And the ability to kind of structure your data from multiple data sources into a time series without it being a Herculean task that requires billions of dollars of infrastructure is amazing. So to give you an example, at one point I used to do some analysis on the impact of brand TV marketing, and looked at share of voice and kind of looked for ways that we could measure it. One of the things that we found was we could look at TV advertising and calls into a call center for sales and tie those two things together. We could do it once a year. It took so much work. Now you can tie that data together so that you could do that almost continuously. The other piece of that is when you look at, in today's world, there's new data sources. So when you do brand advertising, if it's offline, there's new ways to measure it, whether it's from mobile devices, scannable, or tracking, of people walking past outdoor billboards or media, things that are happening at events, or even looking at intermediate capabilities. So when you advertise, two things usually happen, even if it's offline advertising. You will usually see, and if you're effective, you'll see an increase in visitors to your site. I had a client who put a spot Super Bowl ad on and almost melted their servers because people were watching the Super Bowl and suddenly needed betting. It was really kind of interesting to see that immediate reaction. And the second is you see changes in search. So if you look at search data by time, you will start to see the impact of your advertising in an intermediate step. One of the things that makes this possible is this idea of kind of graph analytics, and I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this because I really almost don't understand it. But way to instill confidence in the audience, right? No, because it's when you talk to like a data scientist, this is really complex stuff. It's really about how do you put the data together and think about and how they're thinking about it. But what's really interesting is for people like me who've been in data a long time, we always think of data in relational ways. So we try to connect customers based on, let's say, maybe I have your address and I connect you to this address, right? If I know your address, I can connect you to a Prism cluster because I know your zip code. And now I can kind of know something about you. What graph analytics does is allows the data to be thought of just as individual pieces of data that connect to each other. And so the way you see this happening today is thinking about like social networks, so customer connections. If you think about like LinkedIn and the people you may know, that's all about being able to link your data to other people's data and be able to connect you in time of a network. And the same capability exists when you think about market basket data. What things do people put in their basket? 20 years ago, that would have been impossible, right? You didn't have the information. But now, with everything has a SKU, and everything gets swiped through a register, you can suddenly collect that data. Being able to analyze it has been really difficult. I saw a use case where clients was looking at, when they looked at their market basket, they could look at about 17 weeks of data. And it would take them quite a long time to churn through that, and they could only look at it at the category level. And now we're seeing companies being able to look at years worth of market basket data and look at it at the SKU level. So instead of being able to say, I know you get fruit and dairy, I can see that you're actually a banana and a low-fat milk person, or you're an apple and a yogurt person. It's much more granular, and it can be analyzed in a fraction of the time because the data is just structured in a way that connects the data to itself as it needs to be connected. So what are these kind of like new analytic techniques, and how do they really apply in the marketing space? So there is kind of like a new rules type of capability here. And the first thing I think that when I was thinking about this is one of the challenges is I deal a lot with marketers and IT. I've always kind of existed in that space between marketing and technology and marketing and finance. And typically brand is, it's like the Kevin Bacon game, right? Somebody in IT might know somebody in marketing who might know somebody in the brand marketing space. They don't ever really tend to get together that much. And brand marketers have not had the pull to get like the big budget numbers, like maybe the CRM people do, or maybe the digital advertising people do, because they don't have that. You never had that direct, quantifiable impact in ROI. I think that's changing, and I think this relationship has to get tighter. But I don't think these two groups really kind of exist in the same ecosphere. I was talking with a client, a big client, about doing a big data day, and the one thing that everybody wrote down was when I told them what their advertising budget for the year was. This company spent $700 million on advertising, and all the IT people were like, wow, I didn't know that. And that was readily available information. It's just not something they ever think about. $700 million of spend that had almost no technology associated with it that was controlled by, that the IT department was involved with. So there's this big gap between these groups. The second thing is this concept of big data in marketing, and I think it really kind of started, as the CMOs were like, the CMO agenda is really being driven by needing to have quantifiable information and have a seat at the table to talk to the finance group or the CEO in facts. And what we saw was some of the first areas that we saw big data kind of come into the business was e-commerce, advertising, search, social, but it was all little pockets of technology, and typically outside of the company. Then we saw in the brand space and the other parts of the business, especially around press and research, social media monitoring come into play and be able to start influencing how people were thinking about the things that are happening outside the firewall of the company. And now we're seeing companies investing in optimization technology that's allowing them to munge all this data together to help find new needles in the haystack to drive improvements in their display advertising, in their e-commerce, in how they're touching customers. Maybe not in how they're assigning seats, but in general, they're trying to drive optimization and look for problems like where somebody goes to the website and then ends up calling an agent because that was a very expensive touch that my seatmate had at the table, right? To assign a seat. Suddenly they had like a $30 cost to them. And then we see this new area growing of discovery within the marketing organization. And this is really all-encompassing where you want to bring as much data together and start finding new opportunities of information. Information that was hidden away, that you didn't have access to. Analytics that you never were able to run in the past. And what I think is really interesting about this is there becomes a mindset in a lot of companies where you just stop asking the question. People have creative ideas, and you go, I want to do this. And the technology stops you from doing it. And after a few years of that, you just don't even bother asking the question anymore. So we're kind of now moving into this new space where marketers can ask these questions freshly and expect new answers and be able to really find things that are impacting the bottom line and driving innovation, driving new campaigns, really understanding what's going on in the marketplace and thinking about their business outside the firewalls of their company in terms of a data set. But this really isn't easy. The companies that do this well are able to work together with their technology partners to really kind of capture as much data as they need and be able to really deal with that data at a data management layer and really kind of behind the scenes stuff that you don't want to necessarily feel like you want to spend a lot of time on. It is an expensive undertaking in some ways. And it takes not just money, but it also takes time for people to think about their data. And what we're seeing is the companies that are really tying together IT and marketing are able to kind of collaborate to take advantage of the new economic capabilities of big data technologies and at the same time, unleash the power of marketing to kind of think outside the box in terms of the data they need. The second is, and I've talked a little bit about that today, is this kind of these new analytics and harnessing these new analytics. The organizations that we see making great strides it's really kind of started with, groups of people who are kind of like self-organized themselves that are really kind of changing the way people think about data and, getting out and presenting it and tying it together in unique ways and breaking through all the other reporting and analytics things. And a lot of those people have done this, on their own by finding new tools that they could use. But this ability to capture the data and find new analytics is really the first step because that doesn't really add value to the business. This is where you start adding value to the business. When you can take that information and embed the algorithms into your technologies, into your marketing technologies, so that when somebody comes to your site, they have a different experience. So that when you buy when you buy advertising or decide what channels you're going to use, you change how you spend your money. And as you kind of continue to kind of evolve your organization, you're moving this data closer to the point of contact with the customer. We see that in a lot of the technologies that we use on a daily basis, whether it is maps, whether it is search, whether it is going to just your website and personalizing it. All of those things are really embedding these algorithms closer to the point of to the client. The fourth piece of this is aligning marketing. And this is what the brand area does, which is really kind of aligns marketing around these new insights and innovation. So as long as you have, if you go back to my kind of core statement of, brand is a central organizing concept, then, this is, again, back to do these technologies and how do they align to your brand promise? Because it allows you to focus where you're going to spend your money in these areas. So just to kind of have some key takeaways today, because I think for 8:30 on a Saturday morning and an amazing amount of attendance, I want to kind of summarize some key points, and I totally thank you for showing up and for some of you for paying attention. When you think about brand, it's really hard to break through all that clutter that's in the marketplace, and I completely respect the efforts that brand marketers have to go through to do that. There's a lot of noise, and finding those signals in the noise is really hard. And I was looking at a book list of best books for marketers, brand marketers, before I came here, and Nate Silver's Signal in the Noise was one of the top 3, and I thought that was really appropriate. So, trying to get your brand to stand out is a challenge, and I think there's just 3 or 4 key things. The first is kind of mastering data from all these different domains. So whether it's private data, public data, or paid data, finding those data sources that are right for you and being able to quickly and efficiently bring those together is key. The second is, and these come from our Accenture's technology vision in 2013, which you can download, but I think there's kind of just 4 key things to take away from this. One is, moving from brand marketing to somebody in the technology space that can help you understand this. So you also have a seat at the table as they're building out their big data investment, which has been kind of expensive, which they are looking for. A lot of IT organizations are looking for business uses for this technology. So they're really willing to, they have money to spend, they just need partners to spend it with. The second is designing your campaigns and how you go to market with analytics in mind, embedding the capabilities for data collection, leveraging that information for analytics, and then repeating the process. The third is reducing that data friction between the systems, finding ways to get data from point A to point B so you can analyze it quicker and faster. And the fourth is going back to not just around the budget, but this collaboration with IT to bring together new innovation within the business. We've seen a lot of companies starting to create whole new business opportunities from their big data practice and being able to open up brand extensions. So, for instance, Nike sells shoes, and now they sell fitness devices that measure your heartbeat. Those types of extensions are kind of data-driven and really connecting the customer beyond the point of sale with a lot of products. So with that, I thought I'd open it up to questions, but I do think, this is my central theme, which is brand needs to organize how we spend our IT investment. We need to think about our technology. So,
thank you, Paul.
Sorry. Hey, Paul. Thanks. That was great. Do you can you think about somebody who's doing this really well in terms of being ahead of the game, or do you think that the playing field is really still figuring it out?
That's a great question, Sam. There's two parts of it. Who's doing it well, and is the playing field kind of shifted? There are a lot of companies, there are a number of companies who are doing this well. They're kind of early adapters and really kind of taking leadership positions. So I mentioned Nike is one that really kind of was out ahead of the curve. As Verizon has launched some products in the digital advertising space that are really interesting. What we're seeing is some companies really thinking about data monetization in a new way and refining data and adding new analytics to that data and then pushing it back out to the market. So there are a number of leaders in that space. I do think, though, in general, it's a white space for a lot of players. That there's a lot of space for people to have first mover advantage in these areas, and it really has to relate back to your brand, because whenever there's a white space, you really have to think, what is your core brand promise, and how do you organize around that so you can move forward?
How much change within organizations is necessary to implement this? One of the things that we've been hearing sort of refrain over the last few days is everything from, we've got to break down the silos, to one recommendation that ultimately marketing departments have to be diffused and decentralized across all different departments instead of having them centralized. From your perspective in dealing with companies that are starting to do this well, how, if at all, does it really impact the silos and the structures that are in place? Can this be done without reorganizing everything?
So in terms of like how important is the organizational, I think there's two parts to that. How important is the organizational structure to this type of change? And the second is, what does that organizational, that change have to be successful? The first one, I don't necessarily know that you have to change everything how you're doing it. I think a lot of companies, the ones that you see being aggressive in this space, have taken more of a matrix approach, and they are moving they're letting people kind of work in self-organized teams to go exploit these new opportunities. So that doesn't require massive organizational change up front. I think the second part of your question is, there is a change management process, and that is the hardest part of some of this, because when you've been doing business the same way for a long time, and you have metrics that you use and that have allowed you to drive your business and be successful, it's very hard to abandon those. I was with one client, and we put in this whole new marketing technology infrastructure, and they were like, that's great, but we're not going to use that until we get back our site stats. All we care about is visitors and purchases. And they had everything. They had that, but they had it was buried in this whole kind of complex thing. And they were like, we're not going to change how we do business, because we have all this information. Over time, they did, but you can't just say, you have a new KPI, go manage to that. That is a big challenge for companies, and I think you have to think about that. The one thing that I would say is, in thinking about how you do that, it's really organizing your teams around those KPIs. Because when those KPIs are failing, if you're missing a KPI, and it always happens that some KPIs don't get hit, you have to know who to go to talk to. And typically in marketing is a team sport, and you have to bring that team together to go solve that problem. And so that's where I think you see that organizational change happening.
Paul Barrett, thank you very much.